In this lesson, we're going to go over transformations of quadratics. So the first thing we need to look is at our vertex form of our quadratic equation and what exactly changing certain components do to change the graph. So first, let's look at A, which is our letter that's in front outside of our parentheses. A is going to cause a vertical stretch or shrink. So if your A value is greater than 1, it's going to be a stretch. If your A value is less than 1, then it will be a shrink. The second term we're going to look at is our H value. H will always be inside the parentheses with our X, and H moves it left to right, but opposite of what we think. And so if it's adding a number, then it's going to move it left. If it's subtracting a number, it's going to move it right on your graph. Lastly, we have K, and K will always be outside your parentheses at the end, and it's going to move it up or down. And so our K value is going to move it up if it's adding a number or if the number is increasing, and it'll move it down if the number is decreasing or it's subtracting a number. Alright, let's look at some examples. So the first thing we want to do is to go ahead and graph our parent function. And of course our quadratic parent function is just y equals x squared, which is always going to have its first point at our origin. And then it goes up from here. This will look something like this. And then we're going to graph our new equation. Well, we can tell from looking at the equation that what's changed from our parent function is that it's adding this 4 on the end. And if you recall from our formula, if you're adding or subtracting a number at the end, it moves it up or down. So because it's adding 4, our whole graph is going to shift up 4. And that gives us our new graph. Again, we're going to start by graphing our parent function, which is y equals x squared. Something like this. Then we look at our equation. We notice that two things have changed from our parent function. The first change is this -1. And because the -1 is taking place inside our parentheses, it moves our graph left to right, left or right, but opposite of what we think. So because it says -1, which we usually think of as moving left, it's actually going to move the opposite way and move right 1. And then this end number says -3, so we know that we're going to move down 3. And so our vertex ends up landing right here. There's no vertical stretch or shrink, so everything else stays the same. In our next problem, instead of asking us to graph our transformation, it's wanting us to write a new rule. So it says, let the graph of G be a vertical stretch by a factor of 2 and a reflection in the x-axis, followed by a translation of 3 units down. So there's 3 different things that are happening to our parent function. So when we write our new function, g of x, the first thing we need to account for is a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. Well, remember the vertical stretch goes outside our parentheses. The reflection across the x-axis just changes our a value negative, which will flip our graph over the x-axis. And then it says followed by a translation of 3 units down. So because we're not moving left or right, our x squared stays the same. And the translation of 3 units down will go at the end. And sometimes instead of wanting us to graph, they may want us to write the new equation. So if we know that we originally started out with our parent function, then it's going to tell us that their g of x is going to be a vertical stretch by a factor of 2. It says it's going to reflect in the x-axis, and that it's going to move 3 units down. And so let's first do our vertical stretch by a factor of 2. So we take our original, but remember we said vertical stretch is outside your parentheses and it's multiplying. So this 2 will go outside my parentheses. Also, because it says reflection across the x-axis, that means that our a value is going to be negative. We're not moving it left or right at all, so our x squared stays the same. And then 3 units down is minus 3 on the end. In our next problem, it says let the graph of G be a translation 3 units right and 2 units up, followed by reflection in the y-axis. And so in order to write that, notice this one's not starting with your parent function. It's starting with x squared minus 5x. So any translation we do needs to be to that equation. So the first thing we have to do is change our equation to our vertex form.